Good morning, Central. So glad you're here with us this week. We are going to open with a special request from Michelle. Hi, Michelle, this is for you. And also because I love the Muppets a lot. Why are there so many songs about rainbows? And what's on the other side? Rainbows are visions, but only illusions. And rainbows have nothing to hide. Though we've been told, and some choose to believe it, I know they're all waiting. Someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and who said that every wish will be heard and answered, and wished on the morning star. Somebody just saw the light, and someone believed it, and look what it's done so far. What's so amazing that keeps us stargazing? What do we think we might see? Someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and me. All of us under its spell. We know that it's probably magic. Have you been half asleep, or have you heard voices? I've heard them calling my name. Is this the sweet sound that calls the young sailors? It might be one and the same. I've heard it too many times to ignore it. It's something I'm supposed to be. Someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and
Good morning, Central. It's so great to have you with us in this online worship service. My name is Paul Myler. I am your friendly pastoral intern. Guys, once again, it's great to have you here. I hope that you're enjoying these online services. I enjoy interacting with y'all on Facebook, so keep those comments, keep those little emoticons coming. Guys, I hope that you saw the letter from Michael announcing that we will continue with online services until at least the end of May. That decision was made by Church Council along with the conference and all the Methodist churches on Galveston Island. We feel like it's just too important to protect the vulnerable in our community. So we just can't risk right now getting back together in person. But the time is coming when we will get back together. Guys, I hope you're looking forward to that. I know I am. It's going to be a heck of a party when we get to meet together in person. But things are still going on in the life of the church. I know the Social Action Committee is doing amazing work. We're doing a lot of things around the church to improve our facilities. The children's remodeling project is going on right now, and that space is going to look amazing when it's done. We're continuing with our HVAC, we're continuing with our plumbing, just doing everything we can to use this time wisely to improve the facilities here so that we can continue the mission of Central. Guys, I also have some personal news that I wanted to share with y'all. As you know, I am an intern, but not for much longer. So May the 12th, that's a Tuesday, will be my last day at Central. And it's a bittersweet moment for me. It's going to be hard leaving y'all, but the positive is I'm graduating from seminary. Thank you, Jesus. And I'm moving on to a new thing. I've received an appointment from the bishop, and I'll be moving to Aldersgate United Methodist Church, which is in Santa Fe, Texas. So that's just around the corner, y'all. So you'll still see me around, I'm sure, but I also want to extend an invitation to you. If you're ever in Santa Fe, just drop by Aldersgate and say hi. It's been a wonderful experience being at Central. I'll be preaching next Sunday. That'll be my last Sunday to preach. I hope you can join me next Sunday for that. Let's see, what else do we need to talk about? I think that's it in terms of announcements. We want to welcome y'all. And here at Central, we like to welcome everyone using the same words every week because we think it's important to get that right. So please hear these words of welcome. Guys, no matter where you come from, no matter who you are welcome in this space. Whether you're over-churched or under-churched, whether you are a proud evangelical, a recovering evangelical, or not evangelical at all, whether you're used to high church or low church or no church, whether you consider yourself a passionate believer or just a hopeful skeptic, whether you went to Penn State or the State Penn, whether if you're looking for a community or if you're just worn out on community, no matter what, you are welcome here. And just as the God of grace, love, and mercy has welcomed us, let's welcome each other using those comments right now as Ezra sings our next song.
All right, Central, let's worship together.
Sing like never before.
10,000 years and then forevermore. Bless the Lord, bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. I worship His holy name. Sing like never before. Oh,
Hey, good morning, Central. My name is Michael. I'm one of the pastors here. I want to say welcome. We're so glad that you joined us for online worship today. This is the partner service where we talk about offering, and it's one of those things that pretty much say the same every week. An offering isn't something that can be taken from you. It's called a tax. Instead, an offering is something that has to be given. It has to be offered. So please know this morning, you don't have to give to be here. We believe that God's grace is free. We recognize that God does some extraordinary things through the ordinary dollars and checks and online giving that takes place during this time. So, Central, thank you for your generosity, for the ways that you're supporting this community and Galveston community during this time. Our offering has gone over the last couple of weeks to help support our ministries here to the unhoused, making sure that people have food and hygiene. We're still offering shower and laundry services during this pandemic. Over the last couple of days, too, we've started getting food to folks in our immigrant community. Very quickly, we went from 3 families to over 60 families, so we could use your help with getting food to people who need it. That happens on Tuesday mornings. You can talk to Nikki Obert. She'd be more than happy to give you more information about how to sign up for that amazing ministry. We're so grateful for our partners at the Galveston Food Bank and the Galveston Diaper Bank who are helping us meet those needs. So talk to Nikki if you'd like to help out, especially if you're getting a little stir crazy and you want to see some people. This might be a way to do that from a distance and safely. So lots of other ways that your giving has impacted. I actually thought today I would just take you. Let me just grab this really quick. You can kind of come see some of the things that we've been working on. I don't know if this is breaking the rules or not. So your giving is supporting not only mission outside of the walls of this church, like through our new exterior hand washing station that's going to allow people to safely wash their hands even whenever we're not open. But you've also have to do some repairs on the buildings. We've had Lister Plumbing out here the last week, and they'll be here this week. And thanks to some really specific donors, we've been able to add new hookups for our washer and dryer machines. I'm going to see if I can flip this. I don't think I can. That's fine. So, we got new hookups there. We got a new washer and dryer that'll be coming in thanks to a partnership with Moody Methodist. So that's been really exciting. In this room, we have cleaned it out, and we've got our lockers so folks can store things in here during the week. If you don't have a home, it's hard to keep up with your stuff. Moving around this way, we spent last Tuesday cleaning out this room. It's still full of stuff that's going to go upstairs and some of the construction from next door. But this is hopefully going to be like a resource room with computers and internet access and help people fill out jobs and do training and all kinds of exciting things. So that's coming. And then the really exciting piece, Victor Galvez and his crew have been hard at work remodeling our kids' space, which is going to be in here. It's super exciting. Isn't that brick really cool? Beth and I were scheming with Laura Beth to try to figure out how we could actually take over this space and make it my new office, but Laura Beth didn't seem too excited about that. So anyway, these are just some really practical things that your dollars are helping us do to provide the best possible programming for our kids, to make sure that our vulnerable communities have access to basic necessities. Central, you're amazing. So what's going to happen in just a second is there's going to be a screen that pops up that gives you more instructions for how to give online. Through our app or through our website is probably the easiest. It's a couple steps. You can set up recurring payments like my wife Mariah and I have done, so we don't have to think about it week to week, or just set up a one-time gift. But know that your generosity is making a huge difference in Galveston. There's going to be a green screen that pops up, and then I'm going to run back to the sanctuary, and we'll get started with our sermon for today. So again, thank you for your generosity, Central. You're making amazing things happen in Galveston. I'll see you in just a few minutes. Welcome back, friends. If you have your Bible, turn with me to Matthew 2. You can also pull it up in our smartphone app, or it'll be on the screen in just a minute. By now, you've probably noticed my sweet, custom, one-of-a-kind shirt. A big shout-out to Michelle McGowan for creating this piece of art for me. If you've been around Central for a little while, you've probably heard the story behind this, and if you're new, you're probably instantly deciding whether this is the church for you or not, and I'm totally good with that. So, Central is home to some of the most incredible people with the most incredible stories. And I think one of my primary roles as pastor is to serve as chief story collector. I love hearing stories and making sure that those stories get heard by others. I was having a conversation with one of our folks a few years ago, and this woman, she was sold into the sex industry by her family as a teenager. She would live homeless for several decades, battling addiction and mental illness. And she's walked through hell and back, and yet she has like the deepest faith that I think I've ever encountered. She told me she once shared a cell with Andrea Yates for a while, the woman who drowned her kids in Houston a few years back. And she has these stories telling about the time when she talked to Yates about the God who loved her. She told me that they used to sing that old song, Father Abraham, each night as they were falling asleep. And when I hear stories like this one, I always find myself wondering if I'd have that kind of faith, if I found myself in a similar spot. So I've made it a habit of sorts to ask folks, like this woman, with all that you've been through, why are you still giving this faith thing a shot? And this particular woman, without missing a beat, shoots back at me, well, Pastor, I guess I got me some spiritual cojones. She asked me if I knew what cojones meant, and I said, yes, thank you, we're good here, right? Spiritual cojones. I mean, I can't think of a better way to describe the people of Central. From the resiliency demonstrated by those on the margins, to the courage of those who are standing up to abusive systems on behalf of the marginalized, spiritual cojones. If and when I ever write a book, that will be the title. But it's not just in your robust faith that you demonstrate your spiritual cojones, Central. It's also in your raw, honest questioning. I mean, you are unafraid to put your faith under the microscope and ask the most difficult sorts of questions. And I applaud you for that. 2 weeks ago, I received an email from someone in our congregation. And this person had just experienced significant loss, tragedy, death. They were furious with God. And with hands clenched towards the sky, this person unleashed a litany of rage against the divine. Why would God make a world that's so sad? Why is God so mean? What's the point? What does God even do anyway? And so last week I preached a sermon that attempted to give you permission to rip open your chest and let those sorts of questions fly. And I thought that would be enough. But I got a video from this same congregant this week who is deeply unsatisfied with my response and demanded more. I should probably clarify that this congregant is 6-year-old Lola, okay? And in her video, she says to me, hey, Michael, whenever we do church on the screen, can you talk about God and what God can do? Because a toad and a bird died, and I yelled at God. And I got so upset at God. And I thought Santa could fix it, but Mommy said Santa has nothing to do with it. So whenever we do church, please tell us, what does God even do? So friends, this is, I guess, part 2 of a sermon series that I'm calling Sermons for Lola. And to everyone else that tuned in this morning, I'm sorry, today's not for you. But I think Lola and I would be okay if you stuck around and listened in for a bit. So let's start this morning by thanking Lola for her perceptive questioning. Lola, don't ever lose that. And don't ever settle for a faith that says you can't ask those sort of questions, that demands that you always be joyful and happy in this sometimes evil world. Because if you do that, Lola, then I feel like your Christianity is just escapist. It's not honest. It's not real. It's papering over the realities and tragedies and brokenness that we encounter in our world. But Lola, here's the news, that's not Christianity. It's not Christianity. And in fact, the reality of radical Christianity is one that faces up to the realities of evil, to the tragedies and horrors of the world, just like you so beautifully modeled for us. Now, in your question, Lola, you mentioned Santa. And I agree with your mom here. We'll let Santa off the hook for this one. But I do think you were super perceptive to go to the Christmas story. Like, I think there's a lot in there for us this morning. Embedded in our little nativity story is a section that we tend to not perform at Christmas pageants. And yet, it shows us that Christ descends into a world of trauma and tragedy and evil. So let's look at Matthew chapter 2 this morning, and I want to read verses 13 to 18. Let's see what it says this time. When the Magi had departed, an angel from the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take this child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod will soon search for the child in order to kill him." Joseph got up and during the night took the child and his mother to Egypt. He stayed there until Herod died. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, "I have called my son out of Egypt." When Herod knew the Magi had fooled him, he grew very angry. He sent soldiers to kill all the children in Bethlehem and in all the surrounding territory who were 2 years old and younger, according to the time that he had learned from the Magi. This fulfilled the word spoken through Jeremiah the prophet. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and much grieving, Rachel weeping for her children. And she did not want to be comforted because they were no more. Happy Sunday, right? I've always wanted to preach on this text, but it never seems like it fits in with all the December lights and the holly jolly merriment. But since at least the 4th century, the church has woven this story into its calendar. In fact, every December 28th is called the Day of Holy Innocents, the day of those first martyrs who, though innocent, suffered for Christ. And I think this should tell us something about the difference between a feel-good, domesticated, cultural version of Christianity and the true, radical Christian faith that we weave this story into the Christmas narrative on the 4th day of Christmas every year. That the Christian faith faces up to and is honest about the realities of evil. Notice, this is woven right into the nativity story, the Christmas story, this horror, this slaughter. And the church has said this is something that we need to remember. Authentic Christianity, friends, is honest about evil. And notice what happens. After we've heard the choirs of angels singing about the great joy that has come into the world, the scriptures bring us face to face with the weeping and mourning of Rachel. Lola, this morning, I want to encourage you by giving you permission, scriptural permission, to be honest about the evil in your life. I want to give you biblical permission to name and identify and protest and be honest about the tragedy and brokenness in your life. Singing Rainbow Connection, which was fantastic this morning, does not mean we have to paper over the tragedy. The Bible doesn't, so why should we? Lola, you asked this incredible question in your video to me. What does God even do? And you, my little philosopher friend, are asking a question that has been asked since the beginning of time, when we come face to face with suffering. In seminary, I took some philosophy classes. And in philosophy, there is this ongoing question, this ongoing challenge that we wrestle with. It's called the problem of evil. The problem of evil is kind of this long-standing challenge and puzzle and question that I think many of us have rumbling around in our guts, but maybe have never quite articulated it. Lola, I think this is what you were asking so beautifully. And in its simplest form, the problem of evil is formulated this way. If God is all-powerful, and if God is perfectly good, then why is there evil in the world? Do you feel that tension? Do you feel that question? If God is all-powerful and can do anything, and if God is perfectly good, then why is there evil in the world? Because if God is all-powerful, God should be able to get rid of it. And if God is perfectly good, God should want to do that. So if God is all-powerful and perfectly good, why is there evil? Do you feel that question? Have you, like Lola, ever asked that question? It's natural and probably unavoidable that we feel compelled to try and answer that question. We face it like a riddle that needs a solution. It's a puzzle we need to figure out, because if we don't, it seems like God's very existence is in question. What does God even do anyway? And so, what that question, that very real question, what it generates is then a long tradition of Christian theologians and philosophers who have articulated what we call theodicies. Have you ever heard that word before? Theodicy. Some of you are like, I think I read that in high school lit, right? Homer. No. This is something different, okay? Theodicy. Let me break the word down for you, okay? It's two easy words. Theos is the Greek word for God, and dike is the word for justice, or to justify. So, a theodicy is our attempt to justify God in the face of evil. Does that kind of make sense? So, when we hear this question, if God is all good and all powerful, then why does evil exist? We feel we need to come up with a reason why that's the case. We feel like we need to defend God. So we come up with answers, and we have thousands of years of answers where we might say, well, evil was necessary, so there might be some greater good. Or we might say evil was the sort of necessary risk that had to be taken if God was going to create a world with free creatures, with humans who have free will. All of these are attempts to answer the question, to solve the riddle, to figure out the puzzle, to defend God. And even if you've never read a lick of theology or philosophy in your life, we all have like a practical theodicy that we often like trot out. When we meet somebody who is suffering, and when we hear someone who, in the midst of that suffering, asks, why? We want to give an answer. Like, I'm sure Lola's parents wanted to give an answer. I wanted to give an answer. And so we might, with the best of intentions, say to them, well, everything happens for a reason. That's a practical theodicy. Or we might, again, with the best of intentions, to someone who is suffering, say, well, Paul tells us in Romans that all things work out for the good of those who love God. Those are practical theodicies. They're understandable. But I think we should note that the scriptures never give an answer to those questions. The Bible doesn't answer that question. And the Bible never asks us to defend God. The Bible never calls for us to come to God's defense and justify God. It reminds me, are there any U2 fans out there? Maybe some of you. There's a line in one of their songs where Bono sings, "Stop helping God across the road like a little old lady." I think sometimes that's what our attempts to justify God are like. But there's a more radical response that the scriptures give us. And here's what I think it is. There might actually be something wrong with treating evil like a problem to be solved. There might actually be something wrong with thinking that what you need to do when someone asks why is give an answer. Instead, what we find in the scriptures is something very different. Evil isn't a piece of the puzzle that we have to find a spot for. Evil isn't something you have to explain. In fact, if you could explain evil, if you could make sense of evil, if you could justify evil, if you treated it like a piece of the puzzle and you don't know where it fits, if you found a place for evil, it's not evil. Because you know what evil is? Here's maybe my shorthand definition. I would say that evil is not the way it's supposed to be. When we say that something is evil, what we're saying is, that shouldn't happen. This is not the way it's supposed to be. That bird and that toad shouldn't have died. And if you come along and say to somebody, well, I can actually explain evil. Here's how it fits in the picture. Do you see what you've done? You've actually just turned that evil into something that should be. Are you tracking with me on this? The scriptures don't explain evil. They don't try to justify it. They don't offer us theodicies. Do you know what the Bible gives us? Lament. Lament. We looked at this pretty extensively last week with Psalm 77. Lament, mourning, grieving. And lament in its strongest form is protest to God. We have divinely inspired, in our sacred text, permission, models, examples of facing up to the realities and tragedies of evil, not by trying to explain it away, not by trying to defend God like God is some little old lady trying to cross the street, but by coming to that same God and saying, what the heck, right? Sorry, Lola, I gotta be careful, we're live. Lament gives us permission to come before a good, holy, just God and protest. This is not the way that it's supposed to be. And this is why your rage, Lola, is such a gift. You're modeling for the rest of us what an authentic spirituality actually looks like. See, lament doesn't explain why all those kids from Bethlehem had to die. Please don't explain it. Please don't justify that. Instead, the Bible includes that story. It brings us face to face with that horror and actually is compelling us to ask of God, how on earth is this good news? Where is God in this? So what Scripture models for us is not the arguments of philosophers, but the pain testimony of those who are enduring in the midst of this and still coming to God. It reminds me a lot of the author Elie Wiesel, who suffered through the horrors of the Holocaust. And in his memoir, Night, he recounts another tyrant who is eating up a generation. Listen to Wiesel's testimony. Never shall I forget that night, the first night in the camp, that turned my life into one long night 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that have consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live as long as God himself. Friends, don't be scared of Wiesel's honesty. Don't rush to denounce his sacrilege. Don't rush to correct his theological errors. Don't rush to defend God against those charges. Instead, realize that honest lament might be more faithful than giving answers. Honest lament can be a faithful response to God, a more faithful response to God than justifying and defending God. Because lament, in a sense, is coming to God and saying, I know that you're good, and that's why this shouldn't be. It's a protest that is a backhanded sort of trust in the goodness of the Creator. That's why, please understand me, lament is not the same as despair. Lament, paradoxically, takes enough faith to come to the God that you're angry with, who has promised that things should be otherwise, and to say to that God, this shouldn't be. It combines protest with this impatient trust. There's another part in the book Night where Wiesel recounts this really curious rabbinic story about the Holocaust. Imagine this scene with me. He writes, 3 rabbis, all erudite and pious men, decided one winter evening to indict God for allowing his children to be massacred. After the trial at which God was found guilty as charged, one of the rabbis looked at the watch that he had somehow been able to preserve in the kingdom of night and said, "Oi, it's time for the prayers." And the 3 rabbis, all erudite and pious men, bowed their heads and prayed. Does that make any sense? They just set up this trial at which they've indicted God, found God guilty as charged for allowing God's children to be massacred, and then they prayed. That's lament. It's what Jesus does in our stead. I mean, lament struggles with the hard realities of evil. It even questions God, but then says, "To whom else shall we go?" So this morning we've been talking about Christmas, which feels a little strange in May. We're actually still in the Easter season. It's Eastertide, but I think this Christmas-Easter tension is in some ways as close as we get to an answer of the problem of evil. Like, that's as close as we get. The Bible doesn't really give us an answer to our philosophical speculations and problems. Instead, God gives us God's self. So when we read the horrific story of the slaughter of the innocents at Herod's command, the Bible doesn't explain why a good God would allow such evil. Instead, what we do is we read on. And we see that the Son who was called out of Egypt will endure all of the world's evil for our sake. So while the boy Jesus would escape Herod's sword, in a way, the empire would eventually hunt him down. I mean, Jesus isn't secreted away to Egypt so that he can live in some bubble or a cocoon and always be protected from evil in his life. What happens is God doesn't escape evil. God comes to endure evil for our sake. The God of justice who creates us and loves us, God doesn't give us an answer or a theory that's going to quell our intellectual doubt. In some ways, friends, getting an answer to the problem of evil is sort of perverse. I don't think we actually want that, Lola. Instead, God gives us God's self. God enters history and endures evil. I mean, the God that we worship every Sunday is not just the God who's with us on bright, shiny Rainbow Connection mornings. This is the God who's with us in our darkest personal hells. God doesn't just descend to earth. Tradition has held that on Holy Saturday, Jesus descended into the very pits of hell, the places that you and I know well through our own trauma and heartache. But the good news that we celebrated just a few weeks ago is that Jesus rose again. Jesus conquered it. Jesus doesn't justify evil. He doesn't make sense of evil. He doesn't explain evil. He doesn't tell us how evil fits into the system. He just beats the hell out of it and then rises from the dead. We don't have answers. So, Lola, when you find yourself asking why, or when you ask, how could this God that we worship allow this? Do you know the best answer often? It's for us to say, I don't know. I don't know. Lola, I totally agree with you that it shouldn't be this way. Like, it's messed up. This is not the way that it's supposed to be. I don't know. I don't have an answer. But I have this sliver of hope. A hope that's not rooted in what's rational or what I can explain or what makes sense, but it's a hope that's rooted in the radical, inexplicable grace of a God who loves us enough to endure all of that evil for our sake. And all that I can tell you is, Lola, that I have hope. That seated right next to Jesus are those kids from Bethlehem. And maybe your bird and your toad too. The closest thing that I have to an answer is a person. It's a hope. It's a victory. I mean, Lola, what more could we ask for? Let's pray. God, we are so grateful that you meet us where we are. We thank you for the incarnation, that you became like us, experienced what we experience. God, we thank you that the scriptures give us words to protest you, to lament before you, to be angry with you. But you also give us this sweeping good news of the gospel story, which gives us hope. Hope rooted in the fact that this Jesus has conquered death and evil, and this is the triumph that we are trusting in. So God, give us, on some days, like the faith that we need to trust that. And God, on other days, give us people around us who will believe it when we can't. We ask all of these things in the name of the one who defeated death, this Jesus. And everybody said, amen. Friends, our band's about to come up and they're going to sing one last song before we leave. But before I go, I want to leave you with a benediction. It's just a word that means good words. So hear this morning. Lola, may you always be the kind of person who rages against injustice, who rips open your chest and lets lament and prayers of discouragement and despair find the ears of God. May you continue to call out the tragedies, the brokenness of our world. May you continue to hold God to account for the good things that God has promised. God, Lola, may you come to trust that this God that you sometimes rage against is big enough to handle your questions. And that while we may not have answers for the suffering in our world, we're reminded that the God who made everything, the God who loves you and me, became human and walked among us and endured the very evil that we find ourselves screaming and raging against. Lola, may you continue to yell, but may you also find comfort in this God. And on the days when you don't have faith and you can't believe, may you be so deeply embedded in a community that they might carry you along and have faith when you can't. Lola, the world needs to hear your questions and needs to see your hope. All that means for us is go and be central. Friends, don't forget that next week is Paul's last Sunday. Be sure to tune in same time for him to be preaching his final sermon with us. Take a few moments and enjoy this last song that our band is going to be singing.
choose from.